Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates post-game live after the Warriors claim a 122-114 victory over the Washington Wizards at Chase Center on Saturday night. Not convincing, but the Warriors did get the job done in the end. But at what cost? There's certainly not without consequence that victory with two significant injury blows potentially. The first of which Draymond Green, who left the game after 3 minutes. Of course, he was returning from a 3-game absence and left the court 3 minutes in, did not return. Warriors are saying a left calf tightness, I think it is, but he'll get an MRI tomorrow to determine the severity of that. And then Stephen Curry, this kind of sums up the Warriors season right now. He was dealing with a bit of a thumb issue in the second half. Seemed like it wasn't bothering him too much. He was shaking it out a little bit, but he still had 26 points in 34 minutes. And then, unfortunately, again, to sum up the Warriors season, Steph got injured in the final 90 seconds, or I think with exactly 67 seconds to go. I think they took a timeout with a minute 07 to play after an awkward incident with Jordan Poole where Steph rolled his ankle, apparently, according to Steve in the post-game press conference. Not a significantly bad one by the sounds of it, according to Steph, but we'll just have to wait and see how that comes up. Of course, the Warriors play the reigning champion Boston Celtics at Chase Center on Monday, which is going to be hard enough as it is, let alone without Steph. You'd imagine Draymond will most likely miss that game. Steph, who knows at this point? I'm sure we'll know more in the next 24 hours. And then the Warriors, of course, already without Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, and Kyle Anderson as well. From a game standpoint, again, not convincing from a Golden State perspective. They were down 10 early in the third quarter. The Wizards actually took a lead again early in the fourth quarter. But it was really Andrew Wiggins who, for the second straight game, really stood up in a way that the Warriors desperately need him to without the presence of Jonathan Kuminga in terms of providing his athleticism, in terms of, getting downhill, getting in the paint and finishing. He was huge in this game. 31 points, 12 of 22 from the floor, 4 of 10 from three-point range. Not just that, but he added 11 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks as well in nearly 35 minutes. So a huge Andrew Wiggins game, which is just what the Warriors needed, because Jordan Poole, he looked as if he was going to steal the show and provide perhaps his biggest statement yet in terms of a revenge game against the Warriors. Had over 20 points in the first half, had 38 for the game, JP. He was massive for the Wizards and probably someone the Warriors could do with right now, it must be said. But again, I know we've spoken about that on previous post-game lives, and I don't want to talk about it too much because it's a hypothetical scenario. But Andrew Wiggins was massive. Just the last two games, like we mentioned it after the game against the Timberwolves the other day, like his presence, I suppose, in the paint and making himself known more from that perspective on the offensive end. Like too many times, he's often criticized for not being aggressive enough, and sometimes we just view him nowadays as a 3-and-D catch and shoot off ball player. But without Kuminga and with the Warriors, recent offensive struggles where they've been like 25th in the league offensively since the start of December. They really need Andrew Wiggins to step up, and he's done that. Again, that late third quarter when Steph was on the bench against Minnesota to try and just maintain the 9-10 point advantage that Golden State had during those minutes. And then again in this game, like just repeatedly attacking the rim and, getting downhill. I really liked, there was a play in the fourth quarter, I think. It must be mentioned he had 19 points in the second half of his 31. And there's a play in the fourth quarter where he was guarded by Bilal Coulibaly, who's a very good young defender, and the Warriors posted him up. Often, obviously Steve Kerr recognizing that, hey, we need to get another source of offense here, posting Wiggs up, which is, somewhat rare nowadays, I suppose. And unfortunately, like they didn't actually get the ball to him until he was really he was pushed out basically to the perimeter, and he had to get into his post move from nearly the 3-point line, and he slowly and very methodically backed down Bilal Coulibaly, got basically to the paint, and then a nice little jump hook over him. And I thought that's just another element, another bit of offense that the Warriors can go to and that the Warriors need, because we've seen too many times the same kind of read and react offense, motion offense, split cut action, all this kind of stuff. sometimes it just gets stale and it's too predictable for opposing defenses. So being able to just give the ball to Wiggs in the post and let him go to work, that's a whole new thing that the Warriors probably need to try and incorporate more. And I think his touch on some of these shots around the paint as well have actually been pretty good. Like, I've often criticized Wiggs for his blown layups at times and those little jump hooks from a few feet that you think should be reasonably easy to make. And sometimes he just doesn't. But the last couple of games here, while he's had this really attacking mindset, he's been able to finish these shots, which is really good to see. So the Warriors don't win this game without Andrew Wiggins. One of his best performances of the season, albeit against a Wizards team who entered, having won 6 games for the season. Again, the Warriors looked in trouble here. They looked like they were going to, drop this game at home to arguably the worst team in the league. So credit to Andrew Wiggins and the Warriors. He was really symbolized the way this game went from a Golden State perspective. Yeah, Wiggs made 4 threes, but a lot of his stuff worked on the inside, and that's kind of how it went. The Wizards threw a barrage of threes at the Warriors in this game, 22 of 45, 48.9% from beyond the arc. Again, JP was massive in that, 8 of 15 from downtown for him. And the Warriors, in contrast, were 14 of 41, I think. Yeah, 14 of 41, 34.1%. So they got outscored by, 24 points from the three-point line, which I'm not sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you had a look at the Warriors' record when they make less than 15 threes this season, I'm going to imagine it's not great. The Warriors would very rarely win games when they make less than 15 threes. So a very uncharacteristic Warrior performance in terms of how they got this done, because, again, they had a very concerted effort of getting downhill into the paint, whether it was Wiggins. I thought Dennis Schroder, clearly his best game in a Golden State uniform. Again, it's against the Wizards, so I want to see it, on Monday against the Celtics and against better opposition. But he had 20 points, which is clearly his best in a Warrior uniform since the trade just over a month ago. Had 4 assists, and it was really the first time where there were multiple occasions where he blew by his defender off the dribble out in the perimeter and got to the rim for a layup and was able to finish at the same time. So a positive performance from Dennis Schroder, and hopefully something that he can build upon moving forward. Just a few comments here from you guys. I like Wiggins when he posts up, says Young Wes, who also says Moody had a key steal in the 4th. Let's talk about Moody for a second, who is getting this weird power forward role. I don't think anyone in the first 3 years of his career has ever seen Moses Moody as a power forward, like he's a 2-3 wing. But without Draymond, without Kuminga, without Kyle Anderson in the last 2 games, Moses Moody's now getting this power forward role. So Guy Santos came into the game as soon as Draymond left 3 minutes in, but Guy only played 8.5 minutes. Moody, 29 minutes, essentially as the power forward for Golden State. And he goes 4 of 7 from the floor, 2 of 5 from 3, makes all 3 of his free throws, couple of rebounds, 13 points, plus 12 in the ball game as well. One of Moses Moody's better performances for the season. And it's surprising. It's certainly a very surprising role, but it's one that's actually proving fairly effective. And Steve talked about it in the post-game press conference, the kind of physicality that he can bring allows him to get away with perhaps being a little bit undersized at that position. But even then, like, how many massive power forwards are there in the league these days? Like, Moody's 6'6". Like, yeah, that might be slightly undersized, but only by a couple of inches. It's not like there's, genuine 6'10", 6'11 guys at the power forward position too much these days. So I like it for the moment. Again, what happens when Kuminga comes back and Slow-Mo's back in the equation, and we'll see what happens with Draymond as well. What happens to Moody then, we'll wait and see. But a very good performance from Moody in this game. Cornelis says, we need that Wiggs. That will be turning point. We need Buddy to stop taking the horrible rush shots. Yeah, he took one in the first half as a corner 3 off an offensive rebound, which you just had to shake your head. But he just can't get some consistency. Like, he played all right the other night against the Timberwolves, but this game, 2 of 7, 1 of 4, 6 points, minus 12 in 21 minutes. Should he have played 21 minutes? I don't know. Like, maybe you give some of those minutes to Lindy Waters. I suppose you could just say there weren't really any other options for the Warriors to go to. So I suppose he just has to play that amount of minutes unless you want to bump Waters up, unless you want to bump Moody up even more. But they're kind of playing different roles right now because, Moody's more of a small ball 4 at this point. So, not a good Buddy Hield performance, but we've been criticizing him a lot recently. So I'll try and move on rather quickly. Drew says, is Mike a good GM? Says, so far, nothing I've seen from Mike makes me think that he is. Okay, well, obviously his first move, the Poole for Chris Paul move, I think that's been a lot of like varying perspective on that. Like, I think it's still right now it looks like a bad trade. But I would think for the majority of the time up until now, it seemed like a good trade because you saw the whole of Jordan Poole's first season in Washington was really deplorable. And that led to, a lot of people thinking he had the worst contract in the league and that the Warriors did a good job of getting that off that contract when they did. Now, since then, they obviously moved on Chris Paul and waived him and got nothing in return, which I think hurts this. If you could look at not having Jordan Poole now and at least point to someone that you do have as a result, yes, you can look at, they wouldn't have Schroder right now if they had Jordan Poole, or they wouldn't have been able to sign Melton Anderson and Heel during the offseason if they had Poole. Like, you can look at different moves, aside from the initial one. But if you could point to, okay, we traded Poole for Paul, but then we moved Paul for this person, then maybe you'd feel a bit better about it. But the fact that was essentially a salary dump, and you can go back, I did a full episode after they waived Chris Paul. I was very critical of the fact they didn't use that contract for a player who could have been very helpful to them. Like, they could have got Zach LaVine and had Zach LaVine on the roster right now. Now, would have they been a second apron team, or at least the first apron team? Yeah, absolutely. But, Joe Lacob wants to have these championship contending deep playoff teams, then, that's the kind of sacrifice you make. You spend big on your roster to make that happen. And instead they decide to waive Chris Paul and allow him to enter free agency for the first time in his career. So right now it looks like a bad move, that trade. But again, like, this time last season, you would have said it was a great trade based on how JP was looking. So I don't know. It's still, you're probably not going to know because right now, like, JP's putting up numbers, but until it actually really hurts, it'll start hurting when Jordan Poole is doing it on a playoff team, right? And doing it in the big moments for a good team. Until then, it's hard to really evaluate it because you can always point to, well, it's good numbers, bad team guy right now if you're Jordan Poole. And he's better than that, don't get me wrong, like, he's a key part of the Warrior championship team. But, like, until he starts doing it on a really good team in the playoffs, then I don't know how much it really hurts you. Then Nick says, I think we should trade Buddy. Problem is, I don't think anyone would take him. Yeah, unlikely, just because, if it was an expiring contract, maybe, but 4 years, I know there's player and team options included in that, but yeah, I don't think I don't think it's a bad contract by any means. And as I keep saying, I think he's fine. Like, he can play 12 to 18 minutes, and if he's playing well, it's on the higher end of that, and if he's playing bad, then it's on the lower end of that. Warriors just need to get fit and healthy and have a fuller roster available to them, so the offensive dependency on Buddy Hield isn't as much as what it currently is. Young Wes says Lindy Waters played 10 minutes and zeros across the board. Yes, that's impressive. He was a +5, to be fair, but yeah, no points, no rebounds, no assists, 0 of 2 from 3-point range. Not great. You'd imagine that Lindy Waters III, he was a DMP the other night in Minnesota. You'd imagine that, again, once the Warriors get fully healthy again, that he's probably going to be out of the rotation. Thendecker says, is Steph okay? I think he seems like, from what Steve said, he doesn't seem like it's anything too significant. Not as bad as like a Kuminga one or anything like that, where Kuminga's obviously going to be out for a month. Could be, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on it. It could be a couple of games. It could be fine to go on Monday against the Celtics. I don't think it's going to be any more than a week. Let me put it that way. Cornell says, big game Looney, the offense just looks better, ball movement when he's in rather than TJD. Well, I think things are maybe a little bit more simplistic when Looney's in the game over TJD, simply because that Looney's not a huge offensive threat, and neither is TJD, but TJD at least has the athleticism where you're like, okay, let's actually run a pick and roll with Schroder and TJD, or Steph and TJD, because he does have the athleticism and we saw it in this game. Like, the guy had 6 points, but how many times did he try and go up and just jam it on guys' heads, which I like that aggressiveness. But again, a couple of times he just blew layups or shots that he should have made around the rim as well. He had 15 rebounds, again, 5 on the offensive end. He was okay. Looney, big game, 10 points, 13 rebounds, again, 5 on the offensive end. The Warriors, that was the difference in the game. If you look down at the numbers from a box score perspective in the team comparisons, the shooting numbers were fairly similar. Obviously, Warriors more efficient from 2-point range, Wizards more efficient from 3-point range. Warriors shot 46.9%, Wizards 44.2%. Wizards, as I said, shot better from 3, but the two major differences: Warriors 17 offensive rebounds to 11, and the fact that Golden State only had 9 turnovers as well. Washington had 13. Warriors did a good job of not throwing the ball away, and that meant that they got 10 more field goal attempts than the Wizards in this game, and that really proved the difference in an 8-point win, it must be said. The one thing I do want to point out in regard to Looney and GP2 is I've sat here for weeks and weeks and weeks and talked about the possibility of them being traded and those guys being the most likely duo moved in a trade before the deadline because they are in expiring contracts and they're on reasonable money, like Payton's 9.1, Looney's $8 million expiring deals this season. But then you look at a game like today and Loon and GP2 both close for you. So what do you do with that? Like, if you're Mike Dunleavy, like, what do you do with having two guys who are on expiring contracts who most can see, okay, they're trade candidates, to try and get an upgrade here before the deadline, but they just closed a game for you that you won. And that's the kind of issue that I've had with the Warrior roster going back to the offseason, is there's not really a hierarchy here. So what that means is, like, there's Steph and there's Wiggins and maybe there's Draymond, but everyone else is like just in the same tier where, Steve's going to ride the guys that are playing well and, not ride the guys that are playing poorly and pick and choose, and anyone can really close a game for the Warriors. So I don't know what that means for Payton and Looney, because you look at a performance like this and, GP2 did an okay job on JP down the stretch in the fourth quarter. Was clearly out there to guard him. So, what happens from here with those two guys? Obviously, not only guys that contributed in this game, but guys that mean a lot to the culture of the franchise, championship caliber players that, will go down in Warrior history as, key pieces of that 2022 title team. What happens? I don't know. Let me know. Thandex says Vucevic had like 40 and 13 yesterday. Yeah, 40. He dropped 40 against the Hornets, it must be said. But he went 17 of 25 from the floor. And big thing to me was he went for 17 in the fourth. He had 17 of Chicago's 20 points in the fourth quarter. Like, the Bulls got outscored 27-20 in the fourth, lost to Charlotte, which I think if you want a Vucevic trade from a Warrior perspective, that's probably a good thing. I think the more losses that the Bulls rack up here before the deadline, the more mediocrity they fall into. I think they're now 18 and 24 in the season. I think the more incentivized the front office might be to say, okay, let's actually pull the curtains down on this. Let's trade Vucevic and make a couple of deals, Lonzo Ball, other players that could potentially be on the move before the deadline. So probably a good outcome that for the Warriors, the fact that Vucevic had 40 and 13 and still looks really good, but the Bulls lost, so they might be more incentivized to make a deal. And again, for a Warrior offense that's often struggled in the clutch, to see a guy go for 17 in the fourth quarter kind of pricked my ears a bit, must be said. Brody said, didn't catch the game. Can you please give me a quick rundown on the game storyline and a bit on Poole? Yeah, JP came out firing, making a lot of threes early. Warriors didn't really have it offensively in the first quarter. Both teams got it going a bit in the second quarter. Wizards had a reasonable, lead late in the second. Warriors closed a bit. Wizards got back out to 10 points early in the third. And then from there, the Warriors just kind of ground away and ate into the margin, got in front. That Moody and one late in the fourth quarter, I think late in the third quarter gave them the lead. What the Warriors led by 2 or 3, I think, entering the fourth. And then again, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't overly convincing. The Wizards were still technically in the game with a couple of minutes to go. But once the Warriors kind of got a couple of possession lead, with 3-4 minutes to go, you thought, okay, they're probably going to do enough to hold on here. Again, not convincing, but and JP's always a threat, and Kuzma started hitting some shots in the fourth, but the Warrior offense, was enough. Steph was was decent. Pretty typical good Steph game. Did miss some threes. I'm not sure if the thumb issue. Fitz was definitely saying on the broadcast that he was trying to claim that the thumb injury was really hurting Steph and that he was trying to drive more than necessarily take threes. He did take 14 threes in the game, so I don't know how much of a concern that was. But certainly Schroder and Wiggins and their ability to get to the paint and finish, I think, was very important. And, the Warriors come away with a solid win in the end, certainly not one to write home about. And obviously the two big injury issues for Draymond and Steph as well. Ash says, to be fair to Waters, he was pretty good defensively. Yeah, he's got some size. He battles on that end. I'll give him that. But, you've got to be doing more than going statless in 11 minutes. Cornell says, Looney knows the offense. Look how slow the offense down and get them in a set and get a good shot. That's what he does better than TJD. Yeah, he's way more experienced, obviously. He's had a lot more time to build up chemistry with Steph and Wiggs and everyone, really. So that's not overly surprising. And as I said before, I think Looney's just not really a pick and roll threat necessarily. And so I think the offense does become a little bit more simpler because when you've got a guy like TJD out there and particularly if Schroeder's out there, you kind of can get pretty excited about that pick and roll combination. So with Looney out there, it looks a bit more Warrior style, classic Warrior style basketball, I suppose. Cheyenne says, hey man, love your vids. Had a question with the highs and lows of the Warriors this season. What is your best scenario for the outcome of this season? It's tough. It changes probably on a daily basis, depending on how I wake up. And from game to game, this is why over an 82 game season, I try and keep pretty flat line in my emotions and stuff and don't try and change my opinions too drastically based on game by game performance. But I don't know, it's going to be a question to be answered once the deadline passes and we see if the Warriors make any trades here over the next couple of weeks. But I still think they should be aiming to make the playoffs. That's clearly the first step. And the West is still close enough where if they can go on a bit of a run here, then they can make the playoffs. I always think, yes, the West is deep. There's a lot of good teams. It means the Warriors are under threat of even making the play-in tournament, let alone the playoffs. But there's not the absolute high end, the Thunder are great, but aside from that, which teams really scare you? And therefore, even if the Warriors, scraped into the 7 seed and avoided the Thunder, who assume they'll finish first. So if you finish 6th or 7th and avoid the 8 seed, then maybe you can actually, if you played Houston in the first round of the playoffs, can you beat Houston, a young Rockets team with very little playoff experience? Maybe, yeah. So I still think the best case scenario is probably one playoff round victory, which I think from right now, based on how this season's been looking over the last basically 20, they're 9 and 17, I think, in their last 26 games. So based on what we've seen over the last 26 games, winning a playoff round would be spectacular, I think, from this position. I don't think that's likely. I think the most likely outcome is maybe lose in the first round of the playoffs or just don't make the playoffs at all. Again, I think that might be dependent on what they do over the next couple of weeks, but I don't think there's a move that's going to make them I don't think there's a move that's going to make the best case scenario any better than, maybe getting the second round of the playoffs. I think that's probably best case scenario regardless of what happens. Fendek says, Washington had a season high in threes. Our perimeter defense is so bad. Yeah, part of it is also them just hitting some BS shots. Poole took and made some pretty tough ones, some of the Alex Sarr ones where he just doesn't shoot well from three at all in the season. And, the Warriors are slightly late closing out, but, do get an arm up and they just go in and you're like, eh. It's it was one of those kind of nights where it looked as if the Wizards might get a surprise victory because some of these threes that they just never hit were going in. And I don't know. I agree with you. I've said throughout the entire season, there are some issues with the Warrior perimeter defense and their inability to stay in front of guys, and therefore the defense collapses open threes. It's happened in plenty of games. This game, I don't know. It was more so, I think, Washington having one of, definitely their hottest shooting night of the season. Uh, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. Poti Notate. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. But it says, I know Post is a work in progress, but do you think he can get some playing time as a stretch five? Because I kind of was hoping to check him today and get some game time. Well, I thought when they announced that Draymond was out for the game that we might have seen some Quentin Post action, but unfortunately for him, he's a five, and they can just cover the center minutes with Looney and TJD still. So until one of those two guys go down, I think Post is going to be pretty limited. Maybe there's some games where the Warriors, like that Pacers game last week where the Warriors just rested a heap of guys, and then you might as well throw him out there for 7-8 minutes. He didn't have a great game in the G League yesterday, but as otherwise has been very, very good. That's where the stream ended up there, guys. I apologize. Had some internet issues which couldn't recover from, unfortunately, for the moment. Hopefully it's not an issue again moving forward. So again, I do apologize for that. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at Pop252. That's POK 252 on X/Twitter. Warriors play the Celtics on Monday night. I'll be back for a post-game live after that one. If there's any trade stuff or anything notable to do with the Warriors in the meantime, then I'll be sure to jump back on and cover it in another podcast episode. Thanks again, guys.